Welcome to probability distributions. So the idea here is if we have some experiment or trial that we are doing, we want to know what are all the possible things that could happen and the probability of each of those different things happening. So if we have a trial or experiment, or just some particular situation we're dealing with, we want to know all of the possible things that could happen. These are referred to as outcomes. And the probabilities that would go with each outcome. So, and the probability of each outcome occurring. So here, suppose we were going to flip a fair coin twice. What is the probability distribution for the number of heads? So we can kind of figure out just in theory what we would expect to happen. So if we flip a coin twice, I'm going to make something called a tree diagram. If we flip a coin twice, on the first flip, we can either get heads or we could get tails. And then if the first was heads, we flip again for our second flip, and we could again get either heads or tails. And if the first flip were tails, we could flip again and again get either heads or tails. So this is a sequence of events occurring. The outcomes are the paths if we start from the beginning and then go to the sort of the end of a branch. So one possible outcome, we would go heads followed by heads. Another outcome, we would go heads to tails. Then we would go tails to heads and tails to tails. So our outcomes we had that top one is heads, 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 tails, tails, heads, tails, tails. We're asking about the number of heads. So this is 2 heads, 1 head, 1 head, and 0 heads. So we can then make a little table. We have the number of heads and the probability. So it could just be 0, 1, or 2. 0 heads occurred once out of the 4 times. So it occurred 1 time out of 4. 1 head occurred twice out of the 4 times. So 2 out of 4 or 1/2. And then 2 heads occurred just that 1 time out of 4. So this is our probability distribution. We expect to get 0 heads about 1/4 of the time. We expect to get 1 head 2/4 or 1/2 of the time. And we expect to get 2 heads 1/4 of the time. So then reading this, if I want to know the probability of getting exactly 1 head, well, we can read that straight from the table. So the probability of getting exactly one head, we look in the table for one head, and then we find the probability of 2/4 or 1/2. So the number of heads equals 1. The probability is 2/4 or 1/2. Next up, I want to know what is the probability of getting one or more heads. So the probability of getting one or more heads, I'm looking at the number of heads. Could be 1 or 2. So we could use our 1 or our 2. So we need to include both our 2/4 and our 1/4. So the way we can do this is we can just add them up. So our probability, we have 2 ways this could happen. Either one works. We would just do 2/4 plus 1/4 or 3/4. So anytime we have an or with a probability distribution, we just list out all the possible ways that thing could happen and then add up their probabilities. So if we have an or, that corresponds to adding the probabilities. So for a probability distribution, one minute. For a probability distribution, if we have a probability of blank, blank, or blank, we just add up the probabilities. Or add up the corresponding probabilities. All right, so that's basic probability distributions. We'll deal more with interpreting them.